All right, hello and welcome back to the Old School MMA Review. Today we are live for the first time ever in the history of the Old School MMA Review. OMG. Today we're looking back at UFC 11, the Proving Ground from 1996. And joining me on the opposite side of the screen is Zane Simon. Zane, what's going on today?
Well, I've been building up a 7 month head of steam and mean for this event, which is really impressive considering that it's been a lot less than 7 months since we did the last one of these. But counting's for suckers, so I'm doing well. Yeah.
That's right, because this is UFC 11. All the talk, all the hype gets thrown out at the gates. This isn't footsie, this is the UFC. Those are two of the worst starting things I think we've done. Those are two actual quotes, of course, from the event, because there can't be a UFC event where it doesn't get something incredibly cheesy like that to start the show.
Yeah, it's never better than it is bad.
Yeah, UFC 11, we are one event away from the Ultimate 2, which is a pretty big milestone and turning point after that for the history of the SEG UFC era. We're here tonight in Augusta, Georgia, at the Richmond Civic County Center, I believe it is, with 4,500 people in attendance and 92,000 people watching at home. So pretty decent size, pretty decent turnout of people that showed up. And again, we know the pay-per-view numbers have been shrinking steadily just because, well, they're getting banned.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising, in fact, that they really were able to stay as close to stable as they were, considering that they were getting banned and getting dropped. I mean, losing a few, 5 or 10,000 people per event, or however many it ended up being, because it wasn't like a sharp decline. It was, they got up to like 150 or something, or maybe did they even get up to 200,000 for one of their events at some point.
They've had the most they've ever had was, I believe, 300,000, I want to say.
Wow, well, that's a pretty sharp decline from that, but it still feels like they've been able to maintain a pretty strong like viewership, all things considered, that they were getting dropped left and right.
Yeah, it's surprisingly pretty good. It hasn't exactly been, like you said, a giant mountain peak coming down, but
Yeah,
as time is going on, it's gotten a little bit worse and worse because now, in one way, more attention is coming onto the UFC, and that's actually a negative thing because it's a lot of very bad press about human
yeah,
cockfighting and all that stuff. This is basically now the era of the human cockfight.
yeah, very much so, and you can already like you're getting this weird thing that makes it especially so where they built up enough legitimacy to start actually attracting some very talented athletes, but they're still like scraping the bottom of the barrel for like the worst club fighters and who are available on short notice. And so you're getting this thing where you're basically just getting really talented guys just beating the piss out of, fat cab drivers.
Which we do have, I think, at least one of tonight.
Yeah, we do have one of, along with a fight that pretty much typifies the idea of MMA as like trailer trash wrestling.
Yeah, this is a fun show, and this is now, we're past UFC 10. Obviously, this is now Mark Coleman's second time back in the cage, and he had a really impressive first time show. And here at UFC 11, we've got Coleman coming back, and we also have finally the return of Tank Abbott, which is a big deal, and it's even a big enough deal that Bruce Beck, as they're starting the show, even refers to the brawl in Bayamon, which is what got Tank suspended in the first place. Which, for those who are still trying to figure out what that is, Tank had an altercation back at UFC 8 because he wasn't actually fighting; he was just there. And he got into an altercation with Art Davie and his wife, apparently, and yeah, that got him suspended for about 7 or 9 months, whatever it was, something like that.
Yes, they said 7 months, and I'm actually kind of shocked that, if it was a fight with Art Davie, that they would actually go out and like talk about it. Like, I mean, I guess it must have publicity of the event must have spread well enough through their fan base that they felt like they had to address it.
Well, this is the early days of the internet, and the UFC was, and still is, very big on the internet, using the internet.
Yeah,
Although back then it was a little bit different; they were a little bit more friendly in a lot of ways.
yeah,
But at this point, they were very much involved, and I'm sure word got out. They probably addressed it. I don't really know. I wish I knew more about it, to be honest. And that's
yeah,
something I only know bits and pieces of.
yeah. So yeah, they had and of course the whole like Tank Abbott being back thing ended up sort of like it ended up in a lot of ways being the story of the card, just because it became really obvious how much like the announcing crew really disliked Tank Abbott and disliked having to work with him and promote him. You know?
Which is weird because Tank is like pretty much their biggest star right now, really.
Yeah.
Because Coleman doesn't have the charisma, that's for sure. Don Fry
Yeah.
does not quite have the charisma. Gary Goodridge is, well, he's not quite here. And so they pretty much they have Tank Abbott as their top guy, and they don't really want to do anything with him because he's just they probably think he's bad for the company.
Yeah, and I think Blatnick especially has this very like wants everything to be super professional and super clean cut and like, oh, these are excellent athletes showing off excellent technique, and that means that a lot of his distaste for Abbott and the way he sells himself and the way he fights comes through over and over again. So it ended up being really weird because on one hand, yeah, they're like heavily promoting, oh my God, it's the return of Tank Abbott. He'll probably run his half of the bracket and meet Mark Coleman in the final, and the other half they're like, man, Tank Abbott's such a fat slob. I hate having to work with him.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we don't have Tank. Actually, we have plenty of Tank this time around. I did miss him, to be honest. Let's face it, we missed him. He was heavily missed.
Oh, I missed him. I think that they were probably right to be as hard on him as they were, considering that from everything I've ever heard, anyone who interacted with him personally seems to hate him. But they probably should have put a better face on it professionally because he was a pretty fun fighter to follow.
Yeah, and we also have a few new names coming back, a few other oldies. It's a pretty interesting show. I think we should get right into it.
Yeah.
But of course, before the fights actually start, we always have our opening montage of all the scenic parts of Georgia. Zane, did you enjoy the tour of Georgia?
Yes, especially the part where they focused on the Augusta's booming past as a cotton central. That was really lovely and true, and just kind of not really the kind of thing that you really want to highlight on a broadcast of like wonderful things about Georgia. Look at all this cotton they used to produce.
Yeah, that was kind of a bizarre move. It's like they say Georgia, it's the home of soul, medical centers also for some reason,
medical centers. And cotton. Medical centers, soul music, gospel, and cotton. So.
Yeah. When I think Georgia, I think gospel.
Yes, totally. And cotton.
And medical centers.
And medical centers. And then, of course, after we got our lovely tour of Augusta, we also got the aforementioned example of Coleman having no charisma whatsoever and Blatnick interviewing him like he's 5 years old.
Yeah, Blatnick's interviews are probably the worst he's ever done at this show, and they're going to get worse as the show goes on, which is saying a lot. So even right now, I can call the interview he did with Coleman the worst he's ever done, but he's going to get much worse in about an hour from now.
Yeah, his interview, and maybe you had more of those than I did, because we should always also remind people that we watched a different version. I watched the Fight Pass version again, partially for time and partially just to see what they changed. I was a bit busy, but it's an hour shorter than Matt's version, so there was an hour missing that I didn't have to watch, which probably involved a lot of Blatnick interviewing people.
There was a lot of Blatnick interviews, yes. Zane was watching the Fight Pass version, which you can easily get from Fight Pass. I was watching the old Silvervision release, which is the British DVD release, VHS release, whatever you want to call it, which was taped from the original pay-per-view broadcast. So I have the full 3-hour show, while Zane has the extremely trimmed-down 2-hour show, and there's a world of difference. There's a whole hour gone. You missed a lot of stuff, but you didn't miss anything at the same time.
Yeah, I kind of was like, oh man, this show really moved on at a pretty good clip considering that we lost the last fight out of it. Like, it didn't take that long to watch, but, And if you're watching the Fight Pass version, they've edited it pretty well so that you don't really notice that there's big portions missing. Occasionally there'll be a minor jump or something, but it would usually have just been for a jump cut anyway, and so you just they just jump to a different cut than they would have normally.
Yeah, because the version I saw too back when I first watched this years ago was I basically watched the same one you have from Fight Pass, which was with a lot of stuff trimmed down, because there was an hour of nothing happening. And
Yeah.
that's all it was. And it was edited very seamlessly. They, unlike other, I guess, earlier UFC releases where they have edited even from the VHS release, this one was, they probably just took the VHS, transferred it to DVD, and that was that.
Yeah. So so yeah, we did get this Blatnick interview starting off with Coleman, in which and it's such a weird interview because he's very much like, so Mark, tell us what you do. Do you wrestle? You do wrestle. Like it was really like it was, not patronizing quite, but really weird. Really just like, you don't like being on camera, so I'm going to dish this out in the smallest serving sizes imaginable.
Yeah, I noticed that all the interviews that they did for the show, or rather that Jeff did for the show especially, were very much that way, like just very simplified. I don't know what it was, what the point of that was. I guess they're just maybe trying to get new fans, possibly, or maybe they're just trying to educate the fans that were watching. Maybe they're trying to take a little bit of a safer route by highlighting more so the martial arts that these guys do. I don't really know. I didn't like it either. They were very weak, soft interviews.
Yeah, and of course, we then cut immediately to Don the Dragon Wilson, and the Dragon is back for this event.
Oh, thank God. He's been sorely missed. And by the way, folks, you see a microphone in my hand now. I'm trying to readjust my mic because I just got a new one today, and I'm working on getting the audio better on my end for this show as well. So bear with me while I fumble around.
Yeah. So the Dragon was back, and he gave an interview with Tank that was equally terrible. And especially more so because you got the feeling that Tank's, I'm sure it didn't. I'm sure it was just like, a regular suspension. No, we're not going to fight. We're not going to promote you for a while. You're not going to fight for a while for us. But Tank was talking into the mic like somebody'd come over to his house and threatened his family. Like he just seemed really worried about saying anything that might seem like it was out of line or might get him suspended again, basically.
Yeah, it was a very, very safe interview. It was not the Tank we're used to seeing. It was, yeah, I mean, Tank's polite. That's the given. He usually is polite, even though he comes off as disrespectful.
Yeah.
He's pretty polite and clever about how he is. But yeah, he was just playing it like super safe. He didn't want to risk any trouble at all. And that's not the right thing to do with Tank Abbott. When you got Tank Abbott on the microphone, you let him run his mouth.
Yeah, it was obviously I think they'd put some pressure on him to keep it as low, as toned down as possible. And this could be too partially because of the whole like human cockfighting blood sport label that they'd been given, that they were trying to get their athletes to be less pro wrestlery.
Yeah, that's really the logical choice. I mean, it still was a bad decision, though. You gotta let Tank be pro wrestling-y, if that's a word. I don't think it's a word, but we're gonna call it a word. He needs to be pro wrestling-y because that's just how his personality is. He knows how to work the crowd over, and that's why even at the end of the show, people wanted his autograph, not anybody else's that was there.
Yeah, it was very. He's the one people showed up to see, and he was sort of, I mean, in that way, he's kind of like a precursor to the Chael Sonnen persona of today, where even if he's losing, he's still the most popular guy in the building.
Yeah, and I do have a few notes also about both their interviews, which are definitely things worth mentioning. Firstly, in Mark Coleman's interview. Oh, I think we just lost Zane.
Yeah, he did, and I don't
Are you back, Zane?
I don't know if that ever happened. Yeah, I'm back. I lost you for a minute, but I can hear you now.
Okay, looks like we just have a very severe lag, so that's all. Yeah, I think, are you...
Yeah.
This is the joys of live, old school interview.
Yeah, one of us, I don't know, I got new internet, so my internet should be good right now. Maybe it's the problem on my end. I'm saying it shouldn't be, but it could be, easily. But yeah. So Mark Coleman, I don't know, did he ever try to go back into wrestling? I mean, did he try out for the World Team Trials the following year?
I didn't check into it. I'm not too sure. I don't think he did because I believe at this point he was still fighting UFC at that point. So I don't know if he ever actually went in for it.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole thing that he was trying to do was he was saying he'd probably be able to do both, which I mean, we've never really seen a fighter cross compete to any success whatsoever. Um, and quite honestly, he was a few years out of competition when uh, when he was in the UFC. By the point he was doing this interview, he was like 4 or 5 years removed from competition. So I don't even know that that was a realistic aspiration on
I think
his
at the
part.
time it was realistic for him, but in terms of it actually happening, it was not going to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, Mark Coleman did say he's coming back, or trying to come back into wrestling, and that the UFC had reignited his fire for it. But
And then
other than that, what else did you pick out of that? I didn't get a lot out of it.
no, there wasn't much from Coleman, but Tank, as we mentioned, he had plenty to say. And he said he wasn't going to go toe to toe with Atkins, and he was going to wrestle with Coleman. That was just kind of him being stupid and funny, and kind of poking, I guess, poking the bear a little bit, if you will, mocking his authorities. But I liked what he said. I have it written down here where basically he said he's no longer going to be a pit fighter, and that's made up stuff. He wants to be billed as a street fighter when he fights.
Yeah, yeah, and he did say that the UFC tagged him with the pit fighting label to try and sell him, basically.
Yeah, so he's confirming what we already knew, that pit fighting is only a video game.
Which, of course, is then, a lovely thing to confirm right as another fighter walks out with pit fighting as their discipline.
It's almost as good as ASACs.
Not as good as ASACs. I looked long and hard to figure out what ASACs is. No clue.
Yeah, I still don't know either. I wish we could find that guy. We're about to jump into the first fight, but before we do, I did have one other note. Well, two other notes actually, just before we jump into the actual fights themselves, because there's not a lot of them, folks. So we're going to pad this out a little bit here. We have once again our CompuServe question, because the UFC loves the internet, and they're giving us a CompuServe question, and this time around it's how would Mike Tyson do in the UFC?
Nice. See, that I missed entirely. I didn't get a CompuServe question.
So that you completely got cut out of that entire storyline, huh?
Yeah, and I would love to know how Mike Tyson would do in the UFC. Why didn't they ask me?
I don't know. I think that's gonna have to be our poll question on this bloody elbow.
That's right. I'll still get a vote, damn it.
Yes, your vote still counts. That's going to be our official poll for this week's UFC 11 review on BloodyElbow.com. Vote now. But otherwise, besides that, I'll give you the results that later on once they actually start telling us. But that was actually a big thing. Was a lot of people had Tyson signs, and we've seen Tyson signs before. I also feel like this isn't the first time they've had the Tyson question be a poll question for CompuServe. I feel like this is the second time we've heard that from them. But yeah, this was the question of the night, and there were signs all over the place with Tyson's name, as there have been in the last few events. Somebody had a sign that actually said "Tyson ain't nothing, kiddo," and then down across it was like listed as "Tank" as the acronym for it, which is pretty clever for a Georgia audience, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. My favorite sign was still the Spank Tank sign.
That was a
But
great sign too, yeah. Georgia's got some creative signs. I'm impressed, Georgia. Good job.
they did. Speaking of creative signs or complete lack thereof, did you pay special notice to the UFC graphics for this event and how close they look to an after school don't do drugs special?
Yeah, the graphics were really terrible. I just thought they just use like the fast forward button on a blank VHS, and that's what they used as the cover footage for everything.
Yeah, it was really really bad. I mean, it was like I say, it absolutely looked like somebody's after school Tank was gonna come out with a backwards baseball cap and a big plaid shirt on and try to buy weed and get busted by a hall monitor. That was the graphics they were working with for this event.
And then poor Jerry Bullender walks on the screen and says he's got AIDS.
That's oh,
But it's okay. You can shake his hand. You don't get AIDS that way.
that's right.
Unless he's got a gash in his forehand, and you've got a gash in your forehand, and you shake hands, and you're in high risk. And we just lost all of our viewers that may have risk for being AIDS filled. I don't know what the proper term is for that.
Think we've hit one of your secret ranting points all of a sudden.
Good night, America. So
Matt
yeah,
has a, Matt has a lot to tell us all about infectious diseases and their root causes.
yeah, that 2 days of medical school really paid off.
Indeed.
It's all I could
And
afford.
so I think the world is better served by you not having any ability, any medical authority over anyone.
Yeah, especially since I'm kind of squeamish at blood, I'd probably pass out during major surgeries.
uh,
The UFC, yeah. But back to one other note before we get started. There's no new rule changes. There's no new officials. The only thing that's different now is that they're now officially called the laws of the octagon. They're not just rules anymore. And we do have a different time limit from UFC 10. Now, all the quarterfinal and semifinal fights are 15 minutes with a potential for a 3-minute overtime if needed. And the finals are a 20-minute match with another 3-minute overtime if needed. So, yeah, that's really the only difference in that they actually made the fights longer this time.
yeah, they've been struggling to figure out the time limit thing all the way through. It seems like that's been a constant problem for them ever since the first event, really. I mean, they started with rounds, which they didn't use, and they got rid of rounds, and they've slowly been having to like rebuild this round idea ever since.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the best UFC trivia questions you could ever ask is like, how many rounds, or rather, if you ask somebody what the time limit and rules were for the first UFC, most people wouldn't know that there actually were rounds in the first UFC.
Yep,
No
but
one made it past.
nobody made past round one, so it didn't matter. Yeah, no recognizable judges this time. I was sad to see. Just your usual lineup of karate magazine enthusiasts.
Yeah, nobody too special, just the usual crew. But hey, we do have a returning face as we get into our first fight of the night for the quarterfinals, which is Mark Coleman and Julian Sanchez. We have a returning face. Zane, how excited were you when you saw Gogo Goins take the mic one more time?
I was so excited, and even more excited with his first introduction. Uh, there I'm having my Bill Wallace moment with his first introduction, which was Mark Coleman. Coleman, let's get it on.
Yeah,
he
he just slurs his words together.
he's just got into this whole like. I don't know. I still think that he and John must have had words about the use of the "Let's get it on" catchphrase, and he was just like trying to cram it in at the end of some of names and things like that.
Yeah, I was happy to see Goins back 'cause it's been a while since I saw the G-Man, Rich Goins, and I was wondering what he's been up to.
I don't know. I can't imagine. I think wasn't he like a news host or radio host or something like that?
He was a radio host, yeah, and so he's back, and I don't think he's back for the next one either. I think this is our last appearance. I think this is our final Goins appearance. We're good.
Oh well, it was a good one. He made the best of it.
Yeah, I can't confirm that. We're going to see at UFC. I guess we're going to see at the next event who is still there, but I'm pretty sure this is the final Goins event. But we'll say our farewells to him later. Let's get into the first fight finally after about half an hour of bullshit. First fight, quarterfinals, Julian Sanchez versus the champion of the last UFC, Mark Coleman.
That's right. And Julian Sanchez as we said, is a black belt, an advanced, like I think they called him an advanced master of Ajax fighting.
No, he was not a master at all. That's how crappy of a fighter he is. He wasn't even a master of the fake style that he's fighting under. He was an advanced level practitioner.
Oh, an advanced level practitioner of ASACs. And with a lot of experience in Mexican challenge matches.
Yeah, they don't get much tougher than that. He was 27-2 according to his record. So at least they gave him 2 losses, with his made-up style.
Yeah, between Mexican challenge matches and ASACs, having a record of 27-2 seems like a pretty realistic record somehow. I mean, I can't imagine him winning 27 fights, but whatever,
Well, yeah, he could beat little kids in the neighborhood. Those count.
That's right. And of course, and at this point, like I say, when you're getting guys like Mark Coleman and Don Fry, it's pretty ridiculous that somebody like this is that you're putting him on your card, that you're putting Julian Sanchez on your fight card.
Yeah, especially when you start. Sorry, go ahead. I had a little bit of lag there. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, it's just he's obviously like you actually are getting good athletes. You shouldn't be putting truck drivers in the octagon anymore at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, especially when you look at the landscape of the other organizations that are out there now. Because again, we're in a date now, September 20th, 1996. So we're now having other companies start popping up, including Battlecade, Extreme Fighting has been around now. So we're getting other companies who are getting much better fighters. You know, like I was even just watching recently Matt Hume and Eric Paulson over in Battlecade event or Extreme Fighting event. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, we're starting to get some of the well, Militich will be coming to the UFC sooner than later, but we're starting to get a lot of those guys pop up. So there's a lot more talent right now around the nation, and SEG UFC is still picking up the trash, almost literally, with who they're bringing in to fight.
Yeah, and and of course, to make it even worse, the moment this guy like walks out, Blatnick immediately starts shitting on him. It's just like,
Well, that's because he's fighting a wrestler. I mean, Blatnick's got to, he's got to suck off the wrestlers, so no wonder.
I know. It was just kind of like, we know this guy's not prepared. He's obviously shouldn't be here. But Blatnick from the first moment is just like, this guy shouldn't be here. And it's just like, well, I mean, yeah, I suppose, but
Well, even Beck said the same thing. Like he said as they were walking out, this looks like a mismatch on paper. And I hate to break it to you, Beck, but it wasn't just on paper; it was real life.
oh yeah, it was. But at least we also got to see that no matter what language they're speaking in, all UFC fighters at this stage sound ridiculously awkward in their promos.
Yeah, I think this one had some really good promos, just most because there's a lot more broken English in this event.
Yeah.
And they were all. I mean, I don't like to make fun of broken English because they're trying, but every now and then it's just funny, especially with these old UFCs, because they're trying hard, but they're also being fed lines to say, so it just
Yeah.
makes it even more awkward. Did you write down well, Julian had a Mexican interview? A
Yeah,
Mexican.
no,
He had
his was entirely. That's what I'm saying. Is his was entirely in Spanish,
or
and
as I call it, Mexican. Apparently.
you call it Mexican. That's right. He had a Mexican interview with a sombrero for a microphone. You need diversity training, sir. But
And I'm fired, folks.
but no, even in Spanish, you could tell that he was just like, I'm here to fight, and I like fighting, and I hope I win. Like that was his interview, but in Spanish, basically.
Yeah, and Coleman didn't have anything much to say either.
No,
I
no,
do
his
have,
was no better, but in English.
yeah, pretty much. Not in Mexican, at least.
That's right, not Mexican. They took the sombrero off the mic for Coleman.
So I don't know if you noticed, by the way. Hopefully you saw this. That joining Mark Coleman as he walked down was Kevin Randleman, our first ever glimpse of Kevin the Monster Randleman.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know. Did you have this in your version? I'm assuming you didn't. But apparently, Mark Coleman and Kevin Randleman actually like got in the cage for this event and like rolled around.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that later. That's a whole other thing we're gonna get
Yeah,
to. We'll get to that at the end of the show. But yeah, we did have Kevin Randleman, and also we also had sitting ringside or cage side rather was Ken Shamrock just watching the events with his wife.
yeah. Which is kind of funny considering a Lions Den fighter was there, but it was Frank Shamrock in his corner.
Yeah, it seems like as we've said in the last few events, it looks like the seeds are being sown for the fallout of the Shamrock brothers already at this early stage.
Yeah, it could be. Because yeah, I mean, early on when it was just the Lions Den was just getting started, Ken was in there for everybody. He was always in the corner, or usually just in the cage because it was kind of his show. But already, you're seeing the Lions Den without them putting him at the forefront, which is kind of weird. Oh,
Yeah.
but so Coleman and Sanchez get in the cage, and in my whole this was just a event actually was like a real sort of like up and down event for Blatnick. I want to say it's terrible because one of the things he really showed off was an improved understanding of how grappling works. He was way better in his grappling commentary for this event, but everything outside of his grappling commentary was terrible for Blatnick in this event. Just terrible. Like Beck, Coleman comes out and Beck's like, "Oh, he's the most ferocious competitor we've ever seen in the octagon." Blatnick's immediately like, "That's a gross overstatement." It's like, you guys are really gonna like bicker on air? And he did this like throughout the night to Beck and to Wilson. Whenever they'd say something that he was like mildly overstating, he would immediately jump on it like, "That's just way out. That's just way out," or "I think you're getting that totally wrong."
Yeah, we had a lot of, I guess we call them Blatnickisms, which he's good, especially when there's a wrestler involved. He's going to be all-out support for the wrestler no matter what happens. He's just lucky that it was Mark Coleman who dominates everybody he fights at this event.
Yeah, pretty much. And I also noticed too for this with the Goings intro that they dropped the "there are no rules" part.
Yep, yeah, because again, we are in the midst now of the whole UFC being blacklisted off cable. We're now pretty much at the start where it's even getting worse and worse. And this event in particular, as we mentioned, the buy rate was really down. It's going to get worse from here on out. So yeah, and again, you probably missed a lot of this, but they talk a lot about this actually. They don't address it directly, but they indirectly talk about what's happening. I'm sure you didn't have that segment, but yeah, like, they're being blacklisted as we know in this era. So they're doing their best to try and get a better image, which wasn't going to happen, but. Yeah, they tried for as best they could. So yeah, and that's again why they no longer have rules. They have laws of the octagon. I feel like also that's why they changed that, just to make it sound more concrete.
Yeah, laws of the octagon, no more "there are no rules." A lot, just having everybody tone down the interviews, no more like, "I'm going to break this guy and drink his blood," and,
I don't remember anybody saying that, but I wish someone had.
somebody should have, but, whatever. I can't write this material for them now. It's way too late.
Yeah.
But and then we talk about a lot about the build up because, quite frankly, the fight was Mark Coleman smothering Julian Sanchez with his pec, and that was about it.
Pretty much, we had a 44-second fight as Sanchez literally walks into Mark Coleman's range, just doesn't do anything, just walks into his range. He gets taken down immediately. Coleman gets on top. He eventually just gets into a scarf hold and does a neck crank for the tap out at 44 seconds. Sanchez didn't like getting punched. He didn't like being in that uncomfortable position. He didn't do anything at all, which is nice for him. He got an easy paycheck at least.
Yeah, he got like $500 or whatever they were giving out giving people for the bottom end of the tournament at this point.
Yeah, he had an easy paycheck and a free trip to the States, so good for him.
We need to enroll you in that diversity training stat. All right.
We should mention I'm not directly affiliated with BloodyElbow.com, so all the stupid statements I say are entirely my stupid statements.
And I am directly affiliated with BloodyElbow.com, so all of my stupid statements reflect entirely terribly poorly on my coworkers as well as myself.
Well, hey, at least I didn't talk about AIDS again, so, anyway, besides the point.
Anyway. So, and, yeah, then back once he says that Coleman has great striking and great wrestling, and Blatnick immediately jumps on him saying that he got it backwards and that his wrestling is much better than his striking. And once again, this sort of like pointless bickering between announcers.
Which is funny because we're going to have Beck and Blatnick be the announcers for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know if you noticed this, or I'm not even sure if you had it on yours, because it might have been cut off early for all I know, that Jeff Blatnick kind of sort of coined the term train UFC. Did you catch that?
I didn't, no.
Yeah, at one point they're talking about how Coleman's adapting his great wrestling ability and that he's training UFC style. He says he's training Ultimate Fighting Championship style, and that's what he's calling was UFC. So Blatnick is the official first person to ever coin that term to say he trains UFC.
Yeah, they they didn't have the mixed martial arts moniker in common use at that point, so they didn't really have anything to call it.
Yeah, technically it was still just no holds barred fighting at that era.
They didn't want to call it no holds barred fighting, obviously, because they were trying to get away from the whole blood sport aspect, and they didn't want to, so they were just branding it Ultimate Fighting, basically.
which is what it is. So next time you tell somebody that you train UFC, you're actually being right for once.
That's right. It's the way it should be. You all train UFC. Jiu-Jitsu, it's UFC.
Yes. And so after 38 minutes of bullshit, we've gotten through one fight. I think we should keep moving ahead.
Yeah, probably. So bout two, Brian Johnson versus Reza Nasri, whose name they misspelled on the earlier promo for him when they were showing the opening round graphics. They misspelled his name.
For the Degrassi opening video.
Yeah,
Is that our first Degrassi reference ever in the show?
I hope it's our last. Really,
I
I
don't
hope.
think it is.
Okay, well. Matt may not be with us for much longer, folks. But yeah, so Reza Nasri, who's the 1986 Iranian National Greco-Roman Wrestling or the World Greco-Roman Wrestling Champion from 1986. And apparently they said that he's managed by Sandy Frank. And I couldn't help but wonder, is that like the same film producer, Sandy Frank, who brought over like all those Japanese movies from the 60s and made American ports of them? Just
You
with
gotta
like,
wonder. I doubt it, but then again, how many Sandy Franks do you think there are in the world?
yeah, I don't know. There can't be that many.
Yeah, and we also had, I don't know if you heard this, when Goins was doing the announcing, he called Reza Nasri style Greco-Roman submission wrestling.
Yeah, and I looked this up because I wanted to see what the hell they were talking about. And Nasri had this whole thing where like he was teaching Greco-Roman as self-defense.
Which is kind of ahead of his time if you really think about it. He was doing the whole submission wrestling thing before it had even caught on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mean, it's sort of like I guess that's with the catch thing, catch like sort of like in the dead era of catch, kind of teaching it, but teaching it not out of a catch background, but out of a Greco background as like Greco submission, which yeah, I mean it's definitely weird and it's hard to say how well it worked because he got his ass handed to him.
That he did. That he did. And Brian Johnson, we've seen already before. He was at the last event, and he impressed us a lot. I believe he impressed both of us, and
Yep.
he's still pretty impressive this event as well.
Yeah, he. Once again, I don't want to condemn anyone with visual sort of bias, but he impressed a lot, and then he kind of went. It seemed like he went like roid rage crazy at the end of that fight.
Yeah, I was watching that too, and just to give you guys a recap of the fight, it wasn't much. Nasri he looked a little nervous, and he shot for a takedown.
Yeah.
He didn't get it. I think that was all just nerves, to be honest, more than skill,
Yep.
because we know he's got the skills. We mentioned it, but I think he was just nervous being in that environment. And Brian Johnson, now a UFC veteran, he's won and lost in the cage, so he's a little bit more comfortable in there. He managed to just basically toss him down, get on top of him, and
Basically
then just start.
chokeslammed him.
Yeah, pretty much chokeslammed him. Yeah.
Pretty much chokeslammed him, and I'm pretty sure it knocked him out with that slam, and then Johnson just like headbutted him into unconsciousness and then punched him a few times, and then Big John pulled him off, and it was a really late bad stoppage. That they said that McCarthy apologized for the stoppage to Nasri, but I'm not at all sure because in the replay it showed that McCarthy, I don't know if he broke his nose, but he certainly bloodied it of Johnson when he dived to get Johnson off the top of him. And that was why Johnson went into his big rage fit at the end of the match.
Yeah, pretty much. It's, as he was grounding and pounding Reza Nasri, Big John goes to stop, and he basically forearms Johnston in the face, and that's what basically busted him open. And you see it in the replay, like you mentioned, you see his nose just start trickling blood after McCarthy jumps in there. Like once Johnson's on his feet and McCarthy are both on their feet, like his nose just starts pouring out blood.
Yeah.
That's when he yells "fuck you." I'm pretty sure that was that Big John. I'm pretty positive that the sorry was also to the whole apology was also to Johnston. So it wasn't to Reza Nasri. He wasn't even conscious yet.
Yeah. Johnson, he touches he looks up, he touched his face, and you could clearly see him say, "What the fuck was that?" and then he looks at his hand and he sees the blood, and he just like loses his shit and throws his mouthpiece and starts screaming at McCarthy. So that was
Classic
pretty
Brian
entertaining.
Johnston.
That was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, that was a good moment. And yeah, and again, the fight was very short. I don't think I have the time listed, but it wasn't more than I don't think 3 minutes or something like that, 2 or 3 minutes. It was a very quick fight,
I
all
think it was.
Johnston.
I think it was like 145. It was really short.
Yeah, and of note too at the post fight, we didn't mention this time that Brian Johnston, he's training with AKA, so he's with Javier Mendez and he's with Mike Swain also because Johnston's also got a judo background. And Zane, I don't know how far back your nerddom goes, but also in Johnston's corner was Matt Fury. Did you notice that?
I did not notice Matt Fury. No,
Have you
my fight nerddom may go back less far than yours.
are you aware of who Matt Fury is?
Um, no, I'm seeing a Zen master of the internet, Matt Fury. Is that him?
That would be
Kung
him.
Fu
Yes,
Kung Fu Shua Chiao champion Matt Fury.
that would be the guy. Yeah, he was interesting con artist of a martial artist. And I'm not gonna lie, I got this is the mid '90s and even late '90s. He was basically pushing a lot of his products, which were about catch wrestling. He was kind of really one of the early guys to really, I guess, put catch wrestling out there to a lot of the MMA fans. And he had a bunch of overpriced, terribly made books that he sold for catch wrestling. He made VHS tapes about catch wrestling and stretching and all sorts of different things. Basically, just selling all sorts of merchandise that was not very good. And
Yeah.
just overpricing it like crazy. And I later found out also that he pushed a lot of like Carl Gotch being his mentor, whereas in reality Gotch like did not like Fury, and he says he never trained him either. They only spent a few days together. So Fury was kind of a con artist, but he did bring a lot of attention to catch wrestling, but way before really anybody was paying attention to it in mixed martial arts. So at least he did a few good things, and I hate to admit it, but I actually did buy two of his books, but I bought them on sale, so I didn't pay the full price. And yeah, nowadays Matt Fury he hasn't been relevant in like a decade, so it's okay that you don't know him. But for those who are newer fans, he's worth looking up just because you need to see what we used to have to sit through back in the old days.
Yeah, and well, to be honest, at least it sounds like all he really brought is traditional martial arts attitude to catch wrestling. Being a complete shyster and selling really crummy materials at a huge premium. That's basically the TMA business model.
Yeah, it was impressive. Like he put out entire books that are probably about the size of the average trade paperback comic collection, so not very thick at all. And they'd be black and white, and he would charge $50 for that new. $50. And this is again 10 years ago. That's even today. That's a lot of money for a very
That
thin
is a lot
paperback.
of money. That's a lot of money for a book. Like at that point, you better be getting I mean, that's like a presidential memoir price, you know?
Autographed.
Yeah, autographed. Like books are not that expensive, ever, basically, unless it's huge with full color photos and going to be it cost a ridiculous amount to print. But if you're selling like a black and white zine, basically, then yeah, $50 is kind of ridiculous. Oh, did I lose you? Crap. Somewhere in here there's a problem, and I think my internet connection's pretty good, but maybe it's not. If anybody's watching this live, I don't know who they're watching right now. I can only hope that I am.
With our network. Someone's having network trouble. Either way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. One of us is having a problem. It may be me, maybe you, but I hear you now.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So again, this is the joys of the live show. We'll hopefully keep doing these, but we'll see. So yeah, I guess in that case we can just move on to the next fight. Again, these fights are pretty quick for the most part, except for two of them. I guess I'd say two of the
Yeah.
six we're going to see. And let's move on now to our next fight, which is the wonderful return of DL Tank Abbott.
Yep. And now billed, as we said, as a street fighter, no longer of the pit fighting genre. And you know, you would hope these he had this whole suspension, and you're so used to seeing fighters these days sort of like always in shape, and it's pretty like even compared to the last time he fought, Tank Abbott looks really out of shape.
Yeah, he wasn't really trained too hard. Although he did have a new training partner, by the way, and I don't know if you saw who that was, but
Tito Ortiz, yeah.
yeah, that's correct. We got I think this is our first glimpse of Tito Ortiz. I don't think he was at the other events we've seen Tank with. I don't remember for sure, but I'm pretty positive this is our first glimpse of a very young Tito Ortiz.
Yeah, it might be. I'm just trying to think. He debuted.
Well, his
Uh,
debut is coming soon.
yeah, for the UFC. His debut was at UFC 13. So yeah, this is pretty much our first glimpse. But interestingly, not only is it our first glimpse, but the announcers actually, call him out and point him out. Like they know who he is, which is weird because I mean Tito was basically like, I mean, he was a high school kid or just like fresh out of high school and like hadn't done anything. There's nothing to know about Tito Ortiz. He wasn't some like fantastic athlete that everybody should recognize. So it's kind of weird that they were like, "Oh, and there's Tito Ortiz with him." And it's like, well, why is that important?
I guess when you're Tank Abbott's training partner, it becomes automatically important. Just the fact alone that Tank is training with anybody is amazing. The thought of Tank training at all is equally amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's probably just more what it was, the fact that they're probably trying to bill him as this tough kid because he can go toe to toe with Tank on a daily basis.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, that might be what gave them their first bit of recognition of why of the idea that Tito Ortiz might be somebody important. And I like that like classically between the two of them, like the stories more between Tank and Tito's relationship are about like Tito Ortiz stealing money out of Tank's car rather than Tank doing something horrible to Tito.
Which says a lot about Tank and Tito's personalities, doesn't it?
It really does.
And so yeah, we also have another guy returning now at this event, besides Tank Abbott, and that would be Sam, the Experience Atkins. We haven't seen him in a while, have we?
Mm, wasn't he at the Puerto Rico show?
Yes, he
Maybe.
fought
Yeah.
he fought Don Fry in UFC 8, and I believe he had a prelim fight as well in one of the last two events. So yeah, Sam Atkins is back on the main card, and poor guy is getting first taste of Tank Abbott's return.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and he's got the. I always think of Sam Adkins and the Zubas. I was kind of sad that he like really toned him down for this event
Yeah, I
with
think he
his.
also toned down his exercise regime because that guy looked just as floppy as Tank. Not quite as rotund or Rubenesque, if you will, as Tank Abbott, but Atkins was looking a little floppy.
Maybe a bit. I just loved his thing that he was like, Adkins, his promo was that he says that people have been underestimating him all his life, but he's going to prove them wrong. And he was like a 6-7 pro boxer, and his MMA career was like 7-20. It's at some point, are people really underestimating you, or are you just underperforming?
Yeah, Sam, the Experience Atkins, an experience you'll quickly forget by the time you get to the parking lot.
Yeah, yeah, not a great fighter. Had the right look for the UFC at that point, but not a great fighter. And I also weirdly when they were and this was part of the whole thing where I talked about like the announcers really made it obvious that they hated Tank was that at this point Don Wilson comes out and says that Tank Abbott has no verifiable wrestling background, which I'm pretty sure even at past UFC events they've talked about like his high school wrestling credentials or his like community college wrestling credentials before.
Yeah,
So at
and
this they've actually kind of regressed to this idea that he's just like the least talented guy in the world.
yeah, they're not on the Tank Abbott bandwagon. Yeah, they have mentioned his But then again, they've also mentioned guys who have 200 and
Shoot, I appear to have lost you again.
back now. Zane, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I've got you back. We're still
I really
broadcasting.
wish.
I can hear you. Okay,
Okay,
so
all right. Yeah, we're back again. I don't know what happened, but I missed all that. I didn't actually quite miss it. It was just very chopped. So
okay, well, it wasn't much to miss, but I guess we can actually get to the fight itself now because there's not much else to say other than we're about to experience Sam Atkins, which is mostly him getting knocked to the ground with an easy takedown and just being pushed against the fence until he's submitted.
well, you did miss though. There's similarities. First of all, their last names both start with the letter A, and right after Beck says that that's about the only thing that's similar about them, Blatnick immediately cuts him off with, "I think their styles are very similar to one another."
So
But
Sam
yeah,
Atkins is like Tank Abbott light, pretty much what they're trying to say.
which is once again I think that's Blatnick's kind of way of taking a dig at Abbott.
Yeah, it's I don't like it either, and it's a running theme of the night. And I mean, I guess by the end of the night they're going to both be a little bit happier, those two commentators. But for this fight, yeah, they didn't have too much to say that was nice about Tank, even though he was winning the whole fight for the most part. I mean, they appreciated his strategy, and Tank did fight a pretty good fight considering what he's going up against. I mean, he knew not to go toe to toe with this guy. He took him down hard and fast. He used the fence in a very good way. Because grabbing the fence is still legal at this show. I think that might change at the next event. I thought it was going to change after UFC 10 when Gary Goodridge scaled the entire side of the octagon fence
Yeah.
against Coleman. But that's still not a rule yet. And Tank used the fence to his advantage and got the submission with it.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually be surprised if it was Tank pretty much entirely. Maybe him and Bolander that got them to change that rule finally. Because this was an event for fence grabbing if ever there's been an event for fence grabbing.
Yeah, it's very true. The fact that it was used for not only a submission, but also just to defend a lot of takedowns,
Yep.
defend a lot of stuff we're going to see in the next fight as well. Yeah, the fence grabbing rule, it's going to come up very soon. And it's one of the many rules that has stayed to this day, but one of the most important rules I think because it really does alter the outcome of a lot of fights.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot. I mean, in the modern game, especially if it were legal, it kind of stymies most wrestling. Basically, you can just, you can get that little bit of purchase that you need to stuff an initial takedown attempt, and it's very hard for the guy to on bottom or shooting to recover. So. Yeah, I mean, it takes away being able to grab the fence takes away major portions of the fight.
Yeah, yeah, and again, this fight was about 226, very quick fight. There's not much else to really say about it. It was just very quick. Atkins
Yep.
still doesn't know what to do in that cage, and Tank is a veteran. He's very clever about how to use it, and he was smart in ending the fight as quick as he could. And even when it's over, like he pretty much just darts right backstage. There's no post-fight interview. He just
Yep.
goes backstage right away to start resting up for his next fight.
Yep. Which it's weird that he's taking that he's taking such pains to like stay ready and stay try and like finish the fight early and all that. Because like I say, he's kind of woefully out of shape. So it may be smart of him to do that now, but he kind of like, well, where was all this intelligence and actually training for this thing? If you're like worried about not being in shape enough, that's kind of. But and then of course immediately after the fight for filler and to show how much they dislike Tank, Don Wilson immediately brings up that Tank calls him the Dragonfly, which I personally loved. And I'd call Don Wilson the Dragonfly too.
I hope we meet him one day or we interview him on this show. And we can just accidentally call him Don the Dragonfly Wilson. See what he says.
Yeah. And then of course, and they're like, oh, and Abbott looked so much better and so much improved, and he didn't do any jeering or anything like that. Then Blatnick immediately cuts in with like, well, he did sneer when they raised his arm, and then they did start talking about Abbott sneering, and it was just so petty.
Yeah, and that brings us up to our next fight, which is now the returning Jerry Bolander. He's back again. He's taking on newcomer Fabio Gurgel, who Blatnick says is his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is comparable to Hoist Gracie without a G, as he
Yeah,
says.
that's right. So Hoist AC.
Or he says he meant to say Gi, but instead he says G at first.
Yeah, yes. I know.
So basically, Fabio Gurgel is he's a G and a Gi.
Oh God. I'm not gonna
Yeah, I
make
went
people
there.
watch that video, are you?
Maybe I will. Maybe we're gonna post it after this video.
But yeah, they brought in Gurgel, who is and it's sad because this was one of those things where you could see. I mean, Gurgel has to be looked at as like a huge lost opportunity by the UFC in that day and age. Because I mean, not only is he a four-time world champion in jiu-jitsu, but he's also master to Marcelo Garcia, who is one of the biggest names in modern jiu-jitsu. And here's this great fighter that you're bringing in, and you're matching him up with this kid from the Lions Den, and the rule set is obviously like the rule set is obviously not thought out well enough because while it started out as this way to showcase jiu-jitsu, like all of a sudden your most skilled practitioners and Garcia even or Gurgel even looked like he was in pretty good shape, just can't do anything at all.
Yeah, I think this was a good match on paper that just turned out poorly because of how their two styles are. And that Gurgel just wasn't used to the UFC style of fighting, I guess you could say, like you're mentioning. I think this probably this would have benefited from having Gurgel fight someone else. Like maybe he should have actually fought Sanchez instead, because that would have been an easy, impressive-looking victory for him.
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing was just the fence grabbing. I mean, Gurgel would have schooled Bolander if it hadn't been for the cage grabbing. Because Bolander was able to defend all of Gurgel's early takedowns by grabbing the fence, and then he was able to maintain top control throughout the rest of the fight just by hanging onto the fence while on top.
Yeah,
I
which was
mean,
also made it a pretty boring fight, which is
yeah,
unfortunate because it had the makings of being a very technical, sound fight. It started off really good, and it wasn't a boring fight because there was stuff happening. It was just a very slow-paced, slow-moving fight without
yeah,
without a lot of action. A lot of it is because of that fence grabbing.
yeah, and it. We also got to see a fine or a potential fine. I don't know if anybody ever actually got fined. I suppose they probably did, but that's one of those like it's like the locker room bonuses. You kind of know what happens, but you never know how much. But Bolander got fined for throwing a kick with shoes on.
Yeah, that was our first because that was a rule, one of the laws of the octagon that they haven't actually said before, which is that if you're wearing shoes, you can't kick. I think the last time we may have heard that actually was the UFC 9 super fight with Severn and Shamrock 2, the greatest super fight ever in the history of UFC super fights.
Yep.
I think they said it there, but they've never actually included it in their official rule set that they show on screen.
Yeah, that's never been included in the official rule set. It's always just been a silent rule in the background that if you wear shoes, you can't kick. Which I get it, but it just seems like I don't know. I'm glad that eventually they banned shoes altogether. That was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, outside of that and the fence grabbing, there's not much to talk about. Even though this was a 15-minute match, this match went the whole distance of the time limit, and Jerry Bolander got the decision. But yeah, I mean, 15 minutes, not much happened. I'm grateful it didn't go to overtime because I don't think it would have made a difference, unless Bolander wasn't able to grab a fence and he got taken down. But yeah, 15 minutes, not really a great fight. It wasn't bad though; it was just dull.
Yeah, well, like I said, this was one of the fights that really showcased that Blatnick's grappling knowledge had improved. He talked about Gurgel passing the guard, and got that like right on. And while Beck was like, "Oh, he failed," and Blatnick's like, "No, he's still passing the guard. This is the process and how it works." So, it was good to see some improved commentary and stuff like that. And we also got Wilson's hilarious commentary of here's something they don't have in Brazil, a chain link fence.
Yeah, you guys think I'm racist? Look at Don Wilson.
That's right. And Beck saying back to back butts for Bolander's headbutts. But other than that, oh no. This also Blatnick got like, creamed himself over finally getting to see a knee to the ass in the octagon.
Yeah, it's a good choice of words because that's basically what happened. It's like, oh, finally, they need to do this more often. Give me a tissue, somebody.
And then he went on this whole like rant later about how you could make somebody's entire lower half of their body go numb with a well-placed knee to the ass.
Nothing like a knee to the ass. That's what I always say.
So yeah, that it had that too, but that's about it.
Yeah, just hilarious commentary because they had to keep themselves busy while they were watching this
Yeah.
because not much happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's more comparable to like being like an old IVC Vale Tudo Brazilian style fight. 'Cause that's kind of what it felt like. The way it was paced, it was like they weren't getting reset by the referee. They were just kind of working on the ground, not throwing too many strikes, just looking to pass guard for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another point. Actually, one thing I do want to talk about the fight is the referee does have the right to restart the fight, but why didn't Big John restart this fight? Because I thought there was plenty of opportunity to have done that.
Yeah, I think there was still in the early points of the UFC, there was still a lot of emphasis on like the fight should be completely natural and like untouched if it doesn't have to be. Because there were a lot of fights where they could have been restarted, or I mean, and even to this day, refs don't penalize like blatant inaction nearly as much as they should. But I think at that point we were still just at a stage where the restart thing was like you literally have to be doing absolutely nothing to get restarted. Although they did it to no, they didn't even do it. They didn't even do it in later on. Actually, I was gonna say that they did, but they didn't.
I think they did actually, but it just took forever for it to happen. They actually,
Yeah, well,
Big John did do it.
yeah, like really late in the fight he did it, but the first time was a cut check stoppage. So
That's right. Actually, I might be confused. I'm trying to remember if that was what stopped it or whatever it was, but at least we did have a restart of some kind. This fight could have benefited from having that restart.
yeah,
So maybe it'll be an official rule soon. I thought it was already an official rule that he could restart the fight, but I guess not. It
it
wasn't. It
is.
wasn't yet.
It is an official rule, but he just didn't want to use it.
Yeah. So that brings us to the close of our quarterfinals. So in the next round, we see Brian Johnston take on Mark Coleman, and we will have Tank Abbott taking on Jerry Bolander. Or will we?
Ooh.
Yes, that's
Spoiler.
right. Yeah, so this is the part where we're going to take a break, folks. We'll be right back. We're going to just cut here. So all of our live viewers, please bear with us and go back to the main page and just hit refresh. For all you guys watching on Bloody Elbow or anywhere else after, just go to the next video. We'll be right back with part 2 of UFC 11. Who will survive to become the champion of the greatest tournament ever in the history of UFC? I totally just Blatnicked it up right there and made it sound more important.
That's right. We need to the feeling, the miasma of the announcing is sort of rubbing off on us. I
Yeah,
have to admit.
we're Bill Wallacing and Jeff Blatnicking tonight, so I think it's a good idea. We're going to take a break. So for all you live viewers, we're going to be back in 60 seconds. Just refresh the YouTube page, and for everybody else out there, just jump to the next video. And we got something, so stay tuned.
All right.